Welcome to Making Sense of AI, where we unravel the complexities of artificial intelligence, exploring its profound impact on our world. In each episode, we delve into the tension and promise of this transformative technology, seeking to uncover how AI is reshaping ethics, business, education, and beyond. Join us as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of the AI revolution, offering a hopeful vision for the future, brought to you by Turner and Binova AI. Today, we have a very special guest with us. 𝐊𝐞𝐲 Sahota is an influential voice in the AI community, renowned for his insights on the ethical application of AI across various sectors, including education, but also healthcare and sports. 𝐊𝐞𝐲, it is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, 𝐊𝐿. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And as we were looking at people around the world and voices that we really wanted to have represented, there was something about your profile that really struck myself and my team, and that's the work that you've done around AI and healthcare, also AI for good. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you've made an impact in that space?
Sure. So I cut my teeth being part of the original IBM Watson team. So we started back in 2006. I know I'm dating myself. That really triggered the current AI wave that we're in. And there's a lot of talk about, commercialization, which I get. There's a lot of talk about the liability and the negative risks, because there's a lot of change, which I also get. But I feel like we're a little too wired to look for the threats. And so we overlook opportunities that AI could actually be used for a lot of positive things. There's a lot of benefits we create, but we have to help people build that mindset. So that's one of the things I really wanted to champion was AI for good. And, I was very lucky to be working with the United Nations as a partner to actually make that happen. So there's a big focus and 281 projects today going on around AI for good so that we can actually help people. And one of the SDGs, number 3, is actually good health. And when you really think about it, we haven't really advanced medicine that much in the last 30, 40 years. But, thanks to data and thanks to AI, we're trying to realize that we can actually move to something we're calling precision medicine and actually really augment preventative care. And now we're also realizing that we can actually do things for mental health. So there's a world of opportunity for AI for good, especially in healthcare.
That's amazing to hear. So you mentioned multiple projects. For our listeners today, we've spoken a lot about practical applications of AI in education. So if we think now practical applications of AI in healthcare, what would something like that personalization as a result of the amounts of data that we have access to now, what does that look like in practice?
So I'll give a very specific example, and I apologize to the audience if it's a little bit gross. But we now have something that we call a smart toilet. So we as humans all produce waste, hopefully on a daily basis. And what this smart toilet actually can do, it has a lot of Internet of Things, IoT sensors. So every time we produce waste, it's capturing data on that. And then AI can actually analyzes that. So very quickly, the AI establishes a very deep, precise baseline on our biomarkers. So that if we start developing a cold or a illness, the AI will see a very slight deviation that we as humans can't actually perceive. And we know that the earlier we detect something, the more likely we'll successfully treat it.
So no more sending in stool samples for the most important test of all, e.g. the microbiome.
That's right.
That's a great advancement. And you're right. It's a topic that perhaps we don't always want to talk about, but quite frankly, it can save lives. And have you seen many of the practical applications of AI actually do that, save lives?
We have. I mean, we did a project in Africa that we're now looking to roll out other places. But in Africa, there's one doctor per every 2,000 people. And the average person lives about 70 kilometers away from a doctor or a healthcare clinic. So, access to even some basic, routine healthcare needs is a bit of a challenge. And recognizing, that not everyone's going to have high-speed internet and some of these infrastructure things, we were able to partner with a few people and create a tablet. The tablet is self-contained AI on there, so all you need to be able to just keep it charged. And if someone like gets injured or someone falls ill, then any person like in that little village or town can be turned into a physician's assistant by using this tablet. So you can, yeah, well, prompt questions. You can use the video. The AI will try to analyze that, and if assistance can be rendered by the person, they'll do that. If it's more serious, they'll say, let's seek out a healthcare professional. And if it's really urgent, it could actually help signal to call a helicopter to get them to a hospital.
Neil, it's wonderful that you bring up this example. I spent most of my life living across the African continent, lived in Senegal, in South Sudan, spent time in Eritrea, on assignment for the United Nations, and then also in South Africa, and have traveled to over half the continent. And, you can say these stats and you can say them out loud, but the impact of not actually having that healthcare we deserve and now flipping that and saying, okay, we now have the technology, we have the possibilities to do it. I mean, that is groundbreaking. I can't imagine it's easy, though. What are some of the challenges that you, your colleagues, your teams see when you're actually trying to implement on the ground in harder to reach areas?
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, I'll say that there's always two major challenges in pretty much any type of work we do. The first is data. So data is the fuel for AI. If we don't have enough good data, robust data, usable data, you can't train the AI system. That's a bigger challenge, especially in healthcare, than I think people realize, is because we've found that a lot of organizations don't want to share data. Data is the new oil. And even if they're not using the data, they feel like it's so valuable that they don't want to just like give it away, or they don't want their competitors, I hate to say it that way, benefit from their own data. Like I've seen like the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic not want to partner together on some of these things. Because like my work with the World Health Organization, we've been trying to create a healthcare data repository for years now, but very few people really willing to contribute to that. We strip it of PI, and it's for healthcare professionals and clinical researchers' use, but that's been unfortunately an impeding factor. The second big challenge is the trust in the technology. For better or worse, we as people expect, the machine AI to be perfect, to never make a mistake, and that's absolutely impossible. Our data is not perfect, and AI needs human teachers to learn how to do something, and we're not perfect. The goal shouldn't be perfection. The goal should be what I call hybrid intelligence, where we as people are just augmenting our own capabilities with AI abilities, so that together we're more accurate than we are just by ourselves. The AI can get something right 10,000 times, but that one time it's wrong, that's the thing that gets all the focus. So it freaks people out. And again, not to scare people here, I try and give people the example of an airplane. And I say, what's the acceptable failure rate of an airplane? And everyone says, well, 0. And that's also not possible. I will tell everyone that there is an acceptable failure rate, across the countries for planes. I can assure you it's a very, very small number. You have to kind of set our expectations around these AI tools that they're never going to be 100% right.
And I think in healthcare specifically, that would be something that people, feel like they can freak out about. But humans are also wrong from time to time. And I think what's beautiful about the work that you're doing also is that preventative angle that, yes, it's not always 100%. It can't be, but at least we are trying to make these changes. And, I remember my early days at IBM as well. So we share a previous employer. It's such a big company. I was working for IBM in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates for about 4 years. And I remember the big, data was really the thing we were talking about at the time. And it's funny to experience the world going through these technological shifts. Neil, what do you feel makes AI different?
I think the core difference here, this is going to sound a little odd to some people, I think, is that it actually has a different perspective. So we will always talk about the importance of, diversity in thought and perspective and backgrounds and experiences. And machines actually, they perceive data, they perceive the world differently than we do. So they actually bring a different perspective. Things that we think are like more black swan events, like very unlikely to happen, from an actual mathematical probability calculation are far more likely. After the Jeopardy challenge with IBM Watson, we were doing things in healthcare because we saw a lot of need. There was a lot of data. And I remember that there was a lady in Japan that fell ill. She saw her doctor for like 20 years, tried some things, ran some tests, couldn't figure it out, started seeing specialists. Long story short, I think it was about 7 months later, they didn't know what was exactly wrong with her. And one of the doctors approached us and said, "Is there anything Watson can do to assist us?" Like, well, not sure, but let's try. So, Watson looked at all the great work the doctors did, looked at the tests, actually studied her genomic sequencing, medical history, asked the patient a few questions, and then concluded that, say, like, I think she has these two rare forms of leukemia. Mm-hmm. And the doctors are like, oh, why? Why? There's no way that can happen. This can't be right. So we're like, look, Watson could be wrong. This is why it thinks this is the diagnosis. But can we just test for them? They're like, sure. So they tested for both forms, and she was positive. And they're like, whoa. Right? They're like, this has never happened before. And that was their thinking. This has never happened before. It can't happen. But now that they knew what was wrong with her, they were able to treat her. But then everyone started saying, like, well, how did Watson figure this out? And at the time, Watson had read 20 million medical treatment studies. So because AI has an eidetic memory, it remembers everything it reads, sees, hears, experiences, does, it can retain all that knowledge. A human doctor trying to read 20 million medical studies would take over 300 years of nonstop reading. That's the power of data in healthcare. And that's, the tool that can be really had for doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, and that, I think the average physician has less than 5 hours a month to read medical journals. Imagine to synthesize all that information, have at your fingertips as a physician.
It's incredible. And it's I do believe that we will have to spend some time closing access gaps. I also, like yourself, believe that these projects, when we deploy them, they can make a huge difference. And this kind of innovation at this level always, in a way, starts slow, if you will. And when you mentioned earlier that some of the bigger players don't want to work together, I find that heartbreaking, because if you asked any of them, hey, this could save your mother or your child or your husband's life, they would say, then do it, share the data. Like, ultimately, healthcare is so deeply personal. Neil, what got you on this journey? Because what you do beautifully is you spend time both in the private sector, but also in the AI for good sector. So where does that interest in both sides come from? It seems very organic for you.
Yost, that's a really good question. And I think it's just the way that I was kind of brought up. I'm a kid from the Bronx. I didn't grow up with much, but there was a strong sense of community, and it was just that, people help each other. That grew up, went into the business world. I really realized that there was this weird divide that you're either a for-profit entity or you're a non-profit entity. And I kept thinking to myself, why can't you do both? There's nothing wrong with making money, but you could probably help, make some sort of social impact at the same time. And so I just really tried to push for this mindset. And, thankfully, I'm not the only one. I mean, today we call this social enterprise. And I think that's what we really need to get our heads wrapped around to. It doesn't have to be so binary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't. And my first business was, I started an NGO when I was 22, and then it was just organic. It was like, if you're going to spend your time on anything, why not just do good? Why not just make that impact? So I'm really happy to hear you say this. And how can you translate, how do you translate that to your teams, for example? How do you translate working across cultures and countries and, just ways of working with that spirit that you have? How do you make that practical for your teams?
I really try and create like a culture and an environment that supports that. So I try and, leverage people's strengths. And one thing I've learned is that there's some area that people are really passionate about, that they're going to go that extra mile, that they believe in. For some people, that might be healthcare. Others, it might be education. For others, it might be, food production and security. So you want to tap into those levers. The second thing is really, I've learned that micro actions, like little things, add up in the aggregate. Like I co-chair one of the United Nations climate change committees. And if you go in trying to think like we're going to solve climate change, people shut down because they're like, oh, that's a huge problem. I'm not going to be the one to solve it. And that's not really the point. The point is that there's each one of us, and that includes all the audience members, there's some small action that we're willing to take. And maybe that's we adopt a house plant, or we only take a 5-minute shower, right? In the grand scheme, that doesn't seem like a lot, but if 10 million other people do the same thing, that adds up and moves the needle.
Yeah, 100% it does. Micro moments, micro learning, and micro actions. That's wonderful. You're such an inspiration, Neil. I love the combination of areas that your work touches: education, healthcare, and sports. Tell us a little bit about what you do with AI in the sports domain.
I'm a big sports fanatic. And so, we've been doing things like obviously analyzing players and looking at their style and, I'll say it, mental IQ and capabilities around the sport to try and draft better. I can't name some of these teams, but even like where to position the players on the court or on the floor for defense. But there's a lot going on now actually in fan engagement. So how do we create a more robust and rich experience so the fans get more out of it? Because going to a sports event is not a cheap thing anymore. So you definitely need to up the value of the experience.
And how does that practically look?
I mean, it's things that we're slowly working on. It's especially with the rise of more Gen AI tools that we're able to create. Now, this is still kind of a beta testing, highlight plays kind of on demand. So I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a sports event, like a basketball game or a football game, and see something. It's like, man, I wish I could see a replay of that. Thanks to Gen AI, we're kind of enabling fans to be able to do that. The AI can take all the available camera angles and kind of mix them together to show you that play. You can kind of rotate it around from different angles to really get into it. That's still beta, but hopefully that'll be out in a year or so.
And do you see also that with your work, it sounds like you're more on the people side of things, but from an esports perspective, I know that I'm on the board for an esports startup, and they are doing great things with getting young people involved in building their own careers in esports, which to me, it's fascinating to see. It also just goes to show how that future of work is really changing.
No, that's awesome. I don't think some people realize esports is already a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think by the end of the decade, they're saying it'll probably be like 20 or 22 billion US dollars.
That's, and then just to know that you're giving power to players in that domain as well. It's just such a shift of where we can be entrepreneurial, or we can have something to say about our talents. And it's a really, really interesting. Now, when you think about the future of AI, your work touches multiple domains, as mentioned, education and healthcare and sports. What excites you most? A brutal question, I know, but where do you get most excited about AI's impact?
There's a lot to choose from, but if I have to pick one, right now it's in the field of artificial empathy. So even though AI machines don't feel these emotions, they're really good at detecting the emotional state of a person and trying to change how they interact with them based on that. So like if you start feeling sad, they might try and cheer you up. Or if you start getting angry, they might try and soothe you, calm you down. And that actually has a really profound impact, not just chatting with an AI agent to make it feel more natural, but actually in the area of mental health. That started off trying to help like depressed, suicidal teenagers, but it's also started morphing into other things like helping elder care where loneliness is a big factor. And one of the things that, we've realized is that loneliness and depression isn't just a mental health issue. It actually triggers secondary illness in terms of physical health.
Now, with regards to your engagement there, is it more overseeing and implementing projects? Is it bringing partners together? Is it actual product design? How does that work?
It's a combination of all of that. I'm fortunate enough to work with a few different people on trying to do this. Like you hear of things like 𝐊𝐞𝐲 and some of these like companion tools or even robots for like elder care, working with organizations like, some of the university behavioral health researchers to see like what can we do and how do we engage people, especially seniors, to help them combat loneliness and be a tool for therapists. There's a startup called Everfriend that is actually working right now to benchmark the impacts of loneliness on general health and then see if their artificial empathy AI will generate positive results all across, not just mental health, but also physical health.
I think it's interesting because on one hand, and first of all, I love that you're doing this. I think what we went through globally with the pandemic, which we now like forget, even though it was an extremely disruptive period, we've pretended that we've moved on from the pandemic, while the impact of it was huge. And I remember thinking, for all the elderly folk that were alone during that time, it must have been heartbreaking. Now, on the flip side, Neil, could we argue, so this is me saying I could not agree more with the work that you're doing. I think it's important and I support it 100%. On the flip side, I can imagine that someone might also argue, but AI and technology also make us lonely. And what would you say to that?
I would say that's unfortunately true. We we live in a time of hyper change, effectively meaning that we're experiencing about 100 years worth of change in just 10 years.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we as human beings, we are reactionary. Something bad happens, then we react to it. We're not good about proactively thinking about other uses or misuses that could occur from our work, especially with technology. And as a result, we don't understand the impacts. I mean, it's just coming out now, some of the things that social media has done across the board to people's mental health, that you have these, AI tools that, select what content to service, social media or digital media. And AI is really good about learning our hobbies, our opinions, our interests without directly asking us. And so it's created this weird like echo chamber that now all we see is the perspectives we already believe in. We don't get exposed to that diversity. And so that's kind of created a smaller bubble around each of us. And I think that's contributed to some of that isolation, loneliness factor. I think it's caused a little bit more in terms of extremism, that we're not receptive to even slightly different opinions on things. And unfortunately, the anonymity factor has created, the trolling and some of these other things that we've started creating really unreal expectations of people and how they should look, how they should act, that most of us just can't really live up to. And that's not good for our mental health, and it's starting not to be good for our physical health. And it took us 10 plus years to start realizing that.
So you've obviously made a career blending your passion for technology with projects, products, and systems that actually have an impact on the world in a positive way. You're very mindful of the downsides of the technology that we're working with and that we're deploying. What advice would you give to somebody that's interested in following things that you've done? How did you go about creating this career for yourself, and what can others do to also contribute as effectively with as much impact?
It really starts with just, what is the outcome you're looking to accomplish? Like, what's the problem you want to solve? What's the value you want to create? This is not about using like AI or some other emerging technology for the sake of using it. And it shouldn't be just, and I know that we think about this way because that's how computers traditionally were, about automation. I can just do something faster or cheaper or with less errors. Because when you automate something, you're still automating the flaws. This is about finding a different way of just doing our work. It's a way about changing our process or the system so we could do something better. And that's a tough thing to do because in a lot of cases we're trying to quote unquote fix something that's not broken. But if you look at a lot of the big innovation out there or in our history, wasn't really necessarily about fixing something that was broken. It was about do something that was better. In my book, On the AI Revolution, I actually use the example of the printing press. When it first came out, people wanted to ban the machines and they wanted to destroy the machines that were already out there because they felt like it was going to destroy human knowledge. And I know that we all kind of chuckle at that today because it had the opposite effect, right? It brought information to the masses. It created the need for literacy, which created the need for schools and universities. By the time, that's what they actually thought. And so we kind of have our moment right now with AI, like the printing press. Yeah, there's a lot of bad things that could happen, and we're not good about thinking about other uses or misuses. And smart, machine learning engineers and stuff like that, they build to an outcome. They're not thinking about other things. We're not, unfortunately, wired that way. We have to change that mindset. So that's why I tell people, like, what's the outcome you want to achieve? What's the value you want to create? What's the problem trying to solve? And when you go out about trying to find that, new way of doing it, you have to think about other ways people might use or misuse the technology. And not to sound cold-hearted, but it's a hard truth. Bad actors are going to do bad things. So it's not that we can just like hit the pause button or stop something and just let's try and figure everything out. Bad actors are going to keep moving forward. So if we're not trying to do good things, it's not gonna materialize. The old cliche is evil only succeeds when good people do nothing. So there's an opportunity for each one of us to do something that is beneficial. It could be profitable as well, nothing wrong with that, but there's something we can do to help either ourselves or company or community. We all need to realize that we can be the driver in this. We don't have to be the passenger.
I couldn't agree with you more. Practically, though, what does that mean? I can imagine it's a combination of daring to be entrepreneurial and taking that risk, pursuing what it is that you feel is important in the world. These are all really important skills. What else would you say is critical in actually that implementation factor versus just the let's talk about it and think about it factor?
It also means that when you figure something out, is it feasible? Like, do you have the data? Can you build a team? I mean, there are a lot of resources out there, but I'll use an example, and my apologies to anyone in legal services, but it is the second slowest moving industry I've ever seen. And, a few years ago, there was a guy from my alma mater that reached out to me through LinkedIn. They were local, so I agreed to meet him for lunch. And he was talking about helping to volunteer for current students. So he's a lawyer. He brought his law partner with him, and we're just talking about some of the programs at the university. And as we were wrapping up lunch, his partner kind of asked me a question and said, like, what's the big deal with AI, right? I don't see a lot of it in law and some of these things. And so we started talking about it. And, I was actually telling them, like, the best AI solutions and the most successful, like, AI companies actually come from domain experts. They don't come from technologists. He kind of looked at me funny, and I'm like, well, would you let Elon Musk perform heart surgery on you? No, he's just a savvy guy, but he doesn't know medicine. And so I said, like, if you're thinking about something in law, we can discuss it, but you should look at something that's fairly standardized. It's kind of tedious, but you have a lot of data for it. And, they started thinking about it, and they came back a week later and started bouncing some ideas and started talking about it. Skilled defense litigation lawyers got together, no technical knowledge, and they came up with an idea of an AI system that could process a complaint. So in the U.S., when you get sued, it's a complaint filed against you. And so their AI, they wanted an AI system that could assist with that. And they actually went out and built this as a tool for their own firm, a little AI associate lawyer that would read the complaint, it would generate the corresponding court documents, it would file a counter complaint if needed, start generating deposition questions, and start research initial case strategy. So to do this, they start looking like, well, we have all these cases, there's all these forms, a lot of this is kind of standardized. It's a little different among the states, but that's still standardized. Then they started looking out and said, okay, how do we build a team? So we started looking at what kind of skill sets they needed, and they were able to recruit some people. They started taking this journey, and they realized that having the data is important, but having a training strategy is even more important. It's how you teach the machine is going to be paramount for it to perform properly and accurately. So they realized this is not about having like great machine learning people. This is really about data and training. This was right in their domain, their wheelhouse. They actually ultimately built this. It does the work in 2 minutes that would take an associate lawyer normally 10 to 12 hours to do. Mm. They still have a human lawyer review the work. It takes about 15, 20 minutes. But it works so well that they realized that any firm could actually use this. They actually sold their firm off and started this startup company called Legal Nation.
No way. That's funny.
Yeah. That's what they do now. And they count Walmart and Target, all these big brands as clients.
That's incredible. That's so funny because there you see, this is where it comes back down to process, which maybe from your IBM days, I know I remember from mine, it was like, we couldn't do anything unless everything in the process worked. And, it's frustrating sometimes as a creative or an innovator where you're like, oh, I just want to make things move. But this is where you see the beauty and the power of being able to break down complex tasks into processes and then translate that to technology. And, that automation versus augmentation conversation is so critical. How do the best people in their domains break down what technology needs it to know about what they do? We did see this in the 80s with some of the earlier expert models being trained. But now with all that extra data that we have, I think that process type of thinking, computational thinking, which I know you are extremely well versed in, but it's just so critical.
It is. And what I think Gen AI has really shown us, it's now understanding how things work. What are the parameters that drive the outputs we're seeking? And I think there's surprise that there's a lot of people working on stuff they don't fully understand how it works. I think that's the challenge to kind of breaking down that process. I've got a really good friend, 𝐿𝐽 amazing musician, made some incredible music, and she uses Gen AI all the time. She's been doing this for like 6-7 years, but her prompts are like over 500 words long. She's talking about like her parameters are things like, I want to use these 4 notes. I want to use this chord. I want to use this harmony. I want this kind of beat. And she'll generate something. She's like, okay, that kind of sounds off. Let's change the chord. You know what? It doesn't sound that great as kind of like a reggae song. Let's try it as punk rock, So it gives her a lot more freedom to experiment. But she understands how music is made. She understands those parameters. Yeah, and that's the key thing.
I love that you're saying this. So elderly care, right? My mom has Parkinson's disease. In fact, we were working together, my mom and I, we recorded all her data. She was writing it down by hand. When is she taking the medicine? When is her tremor less? When is her tremor more? When does she sleep not so well? Parkinson's is a terrible disease. It's just heartbreaking. But anyway, we took all the data. We fed it to a secure model. And we got feedback from the model on when and how she could speak with her neurologist on better medication consumption, right? Because Parkinson's is one of the diseases that we really haven't innovated on the medicine since the 70s. And so she took her conversation, Neil, and she took it to her neurologist, and they were amazed that she had taken this ownership of her own data and her own health. Now, why I'm saying all of this is because my mom also sings in a choir, and unfortunately, the church can no longer pay the fees for the conductor. So this choir, literally, Neil, this choir that helps 10 elderly folk 3 times a week, including a concert on Sundays, the choir is going to stop. Now, imagine the impact on the mental health of the people singing in this choir. So this kills me. So yesterday I said to my mom, let's see if we can train an AI that can be your conductor until we find a human conductor. Long story short, they really need this choir director, the choral director. And I'm like, look, let's see what we can do with AI so that you guys still get feedback on your songs. And to me, it's heartbreaking that, music can be impacted in this way and I love hearing this story of your colleague, your contact, who has these huge prompts that get her the results that she wants, and she's using her intelligence to collaborate with the machine. I think it's absolutely stunning. Neil, I'm mindful that we've really you've just spent so much time with us today. I'm so thrilled about all the insights that you've shared, the fantastic work that you and your team do. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'll just say this, that, we live in a time of hyper change, and I know that can be scary because many of us don't like change, but don't necessarily look at this as a lens of a threat, that there's opportunity for all of us, small or big. And I really encourage people to take up that opportunity. Like, I mentioned before that you have the chance to be a driver rather than a passenger. You can each help shape the future we're moving towards. Remember, micro actions add up to big things. So I really encourage people to take advantage of that opportunity. If you're worried about what the future is going to be like, you have the chance to create it. So I hope that you embrace that opportunity.
I love that. Thank you so much. Neil, thank you so much for all your insights. Finally, where should we point our listeners if they want to learn more about your work or working with you?
The best place is to go to my website. It's just my name, 𝐊𝐶HODA.com. It's got links to all my social media, all my LinkedIn newsletter, my Forbes articles, the UN AI for Good work, some of these basic things, like if you're trying to figure out what to do with AI and how to get started. It's a great portal for resources to help people.
Wonderful. So your website, we will absolutely share it when we go live with this episode. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, how you've woven technology into the greater good, and for all the innovative work that you've been doing. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Jos, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with your audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Neil. Have a great rest of your day.
Douwe, Kira, dames en heren, die belt in nu vanuit Californië, volgens mij. Sunny California. Ja. Douwe is CEO en medeoprichter van Contextual AI, een tech-startup in Silicon Valley. En Contextual AI ontwikkelt geavanceerde taalmodellen waarmee bedrijven efficiënter kunnen werken door data op een veilige en schaalbare manier te verwerken. We hebben, denk ik, een paar vragen en dingen voor je. En die zou ik niet stellen, die ga je Jos even van mij overnemen. Dus Jos en Douwe, the floor is yours.
We hebben al een beetje gehoord waarom ben jij zo'n stem in AI? Je hebt onwijs veel gedaan. Maar licht een beetje toe. Wat is jouw interesse en hoe ben je op je idee gekomen bij start-up nu?
Ja, ik wist eigenlijk niet zo goed wat ik wilde gaan studeren. Dus ik heb cognitieve kunstmatige intelligentie gestudeerd, maar eigenlijk wijsbegeerte, om het maar echt in het Nederlands te zeggen, filosofie. En langzaam soort van in computer science gerold en natural language processing, zoals het heet. En daar in Cambridge mijn PhD in gedaan. En toen ik in Cambridge aankwam, toen zei ik tegen mijn adviseur destijds, een soort mentor die ik werd toegewezen, ik wil aan neurale netwerken werken. En die meneer zei, doe dat nou maar niet, want neurale netwerken die werken niet. Dus ik heb een andere adviseur gevonden die dat een beetje deed vond. Dat was ongeveer 2011, toen eigenlijk de eerste deep learning revolutie begon. Dus word-to-back, AlexNet, alle dingen die echt de eerste revolutie hebben gedaan. Toen na mijn PhD eigenlijk meteen bij de Facebook AI Research gegaan. Dus FAIR heet het, de researchgroep die wordt geleid door 𝐊𝐞𝐲. Dus een van de godfathers van deep learning. Dus ja, daar kon ik niet echt nee tegen zeggen. 5 jaar bij Facebook gewerkt, eerst in New York en toen in California. Uiteindelijk was het toen wel tijd om een beetje iets anders te doen. Dus bij Hugging Face terechtgekomen als de Head of Research. Hugging Face is een van de leidende startups als het gaat om open source en AI. Ze doen heel veel dingen met de gemeenschap. Na 1 jaar Hugging Face kon ik duidelijk zien dat de markt soort van klaar was voor heel veel van de ideeën waar ik eigenlijk al 10 jaar of langer aan heb gewerkt. Waaronder grounding en retrieval augmented generation. Want ChatGPT was toen net uit. En voor het eerst konden bedrijven zelf zien soort van hoe de toekomst eruit gaat zien. En daarvoor was het heel moeilijk, denk ik, om een AI te verkopen, zeker aan een soort C-suite, omdat het gewoon onduidelijk was wat de voordelen van AI zijn. En opeens was dat nu heel anders, waar iedereen in de C-suite zat. Ik moet nu iets met AI doen, of ik anders loop ik achter. Dus de combinatie van dat de markt klaar was en dat ik eigenlijk de ideeën al had en ook al had uitgewerkt. En dus Retrieval Augmented Generation is een van de manieren waarop je language models hun werk kan laten doen, zeker in enterprise settings. Die twee dingen kwamen eigenlijk samen om die frustratie die ik zag in enterprises op te lossen. Dus iedereen kan zien dat AI de wereld gaat veranderen, maar tegelijkertijd is de technologie nog niet helemaal klaar. Dus de hallucinatie, er zijn problemen met attributie, ik weet niet of dat het Nederlands woord is, attribution. Een soort toekennen van waarom je iets zegt, dus waarom zegt het language model dit. Dat is gebaseerd op soort onderliggende waarheden. En dat aan elkaar koppelen is iets wat language models niet goed kunnen doen. Er zijn problemen met privacy, met compliance. Je moet ervoor zorgen dat je zeker in Europa met GDPR dat je ook informatie uit het model kan halen. Al dat soort dingen, dat kan je eigenlijk alleen maar met RAG doen. Maar de manier waarop de meeste mensen RAG doen, is eigenlijk verkeerd. Dus mensen doen een soort van de halve RAG, wat wij Frankenstein's monster noemen bij contextual, in plaats van dat ze de optimale RAG doen, waar het hele systeem is optimized, jointly optimized. Als je die joint optimization doet, dan krijg je een systeem wat veel minder hallucineert, wat al die problemen allemaal oplost en nog beter dan de verkeerde RAG die je denkt. Dus dat is waar contextual ook gaat.
Oké, Douwe, super mooi, dankjewel. Degelijk technisch wellicht, hebben jullie inderdaad al daar ook een beetje al voor opgewarmd, maar laten we nou eens spreken over contextual AI en wat jullie dan echt daadwerkelijk doen in 3 of 4 stappen voor een klant bijvoorbeeld. Hoe pas je aan wat jullie doen? Nou, niet hoe pas je aan, maar how do you deliver it?
Hoe pas je het toe?
Hoe pas je het toe?
Ja, dus de eigenlijke vraag is van wat is het product, right? Dus de technologie waar ik het net over had, wat wij RAG 2.0 noemen, dat is de technologie die we gebruiken om ons platform te deliveren, ja. Toe te passen. Sorry. Dus op dat platform bieden we verschillende applicaties aan. Dus het is een soort van eigenlijk een app store bijna, waar verschillende AI of RAG applicaties beschikbaar zijn. We werken met leidende soort Fortune 500 companies, Global 2000. Dus we focussen exclusief op enterprise. En voor dat soort bedrijven bouwen we applicaties als we de applicatie nog niet hebben die ze nodig hebben. Of er zijn veel beschikbare applicaties die ze direct kunnen gebruiken. En dat zijn use cases zoals investment research. Dus je hebt SEC filings, 10K's, 10Q's, earnings call transcripts, allemaal verschillende databronnen waar je met AI over wil kunnen redeneren. En daar krijg je investment research. Een soort assistent uit die je kan helpen met het maken van de juiste investeringsbeslissingen. Dus daarmee werken we met een van de grootste banken ter wereld en hedge funds ter wereld aan. Er zijn dingen als wealth management, investment advisory, dus dat het meer over hun eigen research reports. Er zijn dingen als onboarding, dus we hebben heel veel interne data in bedrijven. Hoe zorgen we dat die interne data toegankelijk is voor nieuwe mensen, zodat ze sneller kunnen onboarden. Dus er zijn heel veel productiviteits- en efficiëntie improvements die we kunnen doen met deze technologie.
Perfect, dus stel ik ben een bedrijf, ik werk in financial services en ik wil met jullie werken. Wat zijn dan voor mij de stappen die ik intern al moet nemen voordat ik met bijvoorbeeld contextual AI aan de slag zou kunnen?
Ja, dus wij proberen het zo makkelijk mogelijk te maken. Ik denk een van de problemen die er nu in de AI-industrie is dat heel veel eigenlijk gebouwd is op soort indie developers. Dus er zijn frameworks of orchestration frameworks, misschien hebben mensen als van LangChain en dat soort dingen gehoord. Maar dat is eigenlijk voor een soort, no offense, maar voor een soort amateurontwikkelaars die zelf kleine demo's willen maken. Het is een soort van laten zien wat het kan. Maar als je een echte enterprise-grade productiesysteem oplossing wil hebben, dan heb je iets veel beters dan dat nodig. Dus wij proberen ons platform turnkey te maken, zoals we het noemen. Dus het is letterlijk je hangt je databron aan je applicatie en het werkt out of the box. En dan geef je ook de tools om het systeem zichzelf te laten verbeteren. Dus een van de grote problemen die je nu ziet, zeker met OpenAI-modellen, is dat als het model een fout heeft, kan je eigenlijk niet zoveel doen. Je kan proberen om de prompt een beetje te veranderen. Maar als dat niet werkt, dan moet je eigenlijk gewoon wachten tot een GPT-5 uitkomt, of de volgende GPT. Dus je hebt niet echt de controle over wat er in het language model gebeurt. En dat proberen wij voor onze klanten veel makkelijker te maken.
We hebben inderdaad vandaag een beetje besproken wat het kan betekenen als je echt gewoon op één line verder moet met één technologiepartner. En dat heel erg beklemmerend kan werken. En wat voor advies zou je nu al geven aan bedrijven die in financial services werken? Insurers, banken, payment platforms.
Ja, ik denk dat het belangrijkste advies is om te experimenteren. Het is experimentele technologie, maar als je gaat wachten tot de markt er klaar voor is en alles helemaal werkt, dan ben je te laat. Dus nu is het moment om er nog mee te experimenteren. Ik zou het nog niet customer-facing doen, dus direct naar de klant. Ik zou het doen op een manier dat er humans in de loop zijn, zoals wij altijd zeggen. Dus dat er nog steeds mensen zijn die ertussen zitten, maar die mensen die worden veel efficiënter gemaakt door het gebruiken van AI. En dus je kan denken aan een soort investment research use case, als er financiële analisten hun werk daar veel beter kunnen doen. Dan gaat de productiviteit van het hele bedrijf omhoog natuurlijk.
Wat fijn dat je dat zo mooi uitlegt. Dat is super. Daar hebben we vanochtend ook, of vanmiddag een beetje over gesproken. Internal of gaan we external aan de slag? Gaan we augmenten of gaan we automation doen? Dus daar kun je al aan dat soort categorieën gaan denken. Nou, dit is super. Wat fijn dat je zoveel mooie inzichten met ons deelt. First hand, hartstikke fijn. Dankjewel. Wat zie jij nu als de grootste uitdagingen in het AI-vlak? Like in the field of AI?
Ik denk dat qua technologie bestaan alle bouwstenen nu. Ik denk vorig jaar was het jaar van de demo. Iedereen kon in een Langchain en Lama Index snelle demo's bouwen om te laten zien waar ik naartoe zou gaan. Dit jaar is echt het jaar van de eerste productie use cases. Dus daar zijn wij ook heel erg mee bezig. Hoe krijgen we dit echt in production en niet alleen maar als leuke demo. Volgend jaar wordt echt het jaar van de ROI. Dus hoe verbinden we deze oplossingen aan directe ROI, zodat bedrijven kunnen zien, oké, dit is hoeveel ik bespaar doordat ik mijn analisten veel efficiënter heb gemaakt. Maar als voorbeeld. Dus ik denk dat de grootste uitdaging eigenlijk niet meer aan de technologiekant zit, maar veel meer aan de soort enterprise kant. Hoe bouwen we echte producten met deze AI-systemen? En ChatGPT is een heel goed product, maar dat is eigenlijk een consumer product. Het is een generalist intelligence, dus dat moet soort van voor iedereen wat doen. En ik denk dat de interessante nieuwe manier van er naar kijken is hoe kunnen we gespecialiseerde oplossingen bouwen voor bedrijven. En echt focussen op enterprise, zodat er daadwerkelijke ROI is. Maar om dat op de juiste manier te doen, dat probeert iedereen uit te weten. Wij, ook Google, Microsoft, Amazon, maar ook alle andere bedrijven.
Ja, dankjewel. Ja, super fijn dat je erbij was vandaag. Dankjewel voor al je inzichten. En gefeliciteerd met je mooie carrière ook.
Dankjewel.
Zeker.
A huge thank you to both of our guests. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Making Sense of AI. We hope you enjoyed listening and that it's given you valuable insights. If you found today's discussion enlightening, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. This podcast was brought to you by Turner and Binova AI. To deploy AI at your business today, reach out now via the links in the description or directly on LinkedIn. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep on making sense of AI. Goodbye for now.